Welcome back, everyone. That was a terrific panel, really the first of its kind, and I think quite an historic event. So glad you could have watched it. So glad you're staying with us right now in this marathon all day long of some of the best IR teachings you will ever get. The next one is a spotlight, and thanks for tuning into this one as well. So who do we have up here? It's the United States Secret Service. And what do they have to do with incident response? Well, you're going to find out, because we could not be more thrilled with our next panelist, Michael D'Ambrosio, who just a few days ago, yes, 4 days ago, he retired from the Secret Service. He was the Assistant Director for Cyber Office of Investigations. And what makes him a cyber expert is not just that he helped lead 162 field offices of the U.S. Secret Service, protecting our financial system on 40 different electronic crime task forces and 46 financial crime task forces. But it's also that Mike has been helping keep us safe since 1991, when he was a platoon commander in the Marine Corps, and has dedicated his professional life to help protect us all. And on top of that, he's also got a CISO certificate from Carnegie Mellon. Thank you, Mike, for devoting 30 years of your life to helping keep us safe. Congratulations on your retirement. I don't see a Hawaiian shirt, so I'm guessing you got a job in the private sector, which maybe we can't hear about quite yet. But we wish you all the best in your new role, and welcome today.
Thank you very much, John.
So who could we get to take on this interview? Well, we found the perfect person. Robyn Bacon teaches trial advocacy at Harvard Law School. She's taught evidence at USC Gould School of Law, and also guest lectured on sentencing at the University of California Irvine School of Law. Robyn is also a partner at Munger and a former federal prosecutor and deputy chief of the General Crimes Section in Los Angeles. And of course, being from Los Angeles, she has a degree in film production from USC. In fact, Robyn told me that when she graduated from film school, I said, well, why didn't you go into film? She said, I didn't want to make movies, but instead I wanted to live movies. So she took up the law. Given that I've always thought Mike D'Ambrosio was straight out of Central Casting as a no-nonsense federal agent, Robyn's unique perspective here is ideal for this spotlight. So take it away, Robyn. Can't wait to hear what you guys talk about.
Thanks, John. I'm actually very excited to hear what Mike has to say today, too. So, Mike, thank you very much for sitting down with us, and let's get rolling. I guess my first question to you, Mike, is when I think cyber, I think FBI. Tell me about what the Secret Service is doing in this space that we need to know about.
Yeah, you know, Robyn, everybody does, right? Think about the FBI first as it comes to cyber. I'll actually say the Secret Service, our electronic crimes task forces, were really a precursor to all the cyber activity that occurred, right? The Secret Service has been protecting the financial infrastructure since 1865. At that point, it was protecting it primarily from counterfeit currency. About 1/3 of all currency at the time was counterfeit. But listen, the financial sector moved very quickly to the use of technology. And so the Secret Service really had to adapt and evolve, right? And so with the advent of credit cards and the movement of electronic movement of money, the Secret Service became an early on evolved into investigations into cyber technology, right? But what I like to say is this, Robyn, honestly, is that we don't do cyber. We still do financial crime. They're just conducted with technology today.
That's a good point, Mike. And I'd like to ask you, one of the things that I hear a lot from clients now that I'm in the private sector is basically there's some confusion about this idea of, how much do I really need to be worrying about mysterious hackers overseas versus the guy next door who's trying to rip us off? Do you have any advice for clients in the financial sector or any business about how much they should be worrying about ghosts abroad versus the bad guy next door?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to a term that we used to use in the Marine Corps when it comes to that. I think most companies should be focused on good order and discipline, right? And so what I mean by that is when I was in the Marine Corps, you wanted to do the simple things right? And so if you were going out on patrol, you wanted to make sure that you had all the right gear, right? That you had everything tied down, that all the things were quiet. Well, in cybersecurity, I think it's the same way. Most of your attacks are not really very complex. They're really taking advantage of things, right, that individuals should do. So think about it, right? If you've implemented good patching systems, if you have good segmentation of your networks, if you have practices related to least privilege, if you have an incident response plan, if you're addressing the phishing concerns, you're going to prevent most types of attacks that are going to target your particular network. I wouldn't worry too much between whether the attacker is an overseas attacker or whether it's the domestic attacker. That can get real complicated. Let law enforcement sort of deal with that and figure it out. Most of even your international actors are taking advantage of, most attacks right now are phishing attacks. They're taking advantage of somebody clicking on a malicious link and then making your network vulnerable.
Well, I have to say, at least in my own experience, that it's definitely a situation where no matter how good the defense is, one person who doesn't know not to click on the link can undermine everything. And so I think a lot of times folks get so caught up in the computers and the technology, they forget how important people are, that you need to train your people. Don't click on the link. You need to have human connections with the folks in your security in order to make sure everybody knows what's going on and how to handle a crisis. But the other question that then comes up when I'm trying to help my clients understand how do we be good Marines, how do we make sure our pack is together, is how early in this process should they be reaching out to law enforcement? There's a lot of anxiety about that, Mike. I'd like to know your perspective as somebody who's just left law enforcement behind. Are people coming to you too late? Do you want them coming earlier? Or is there a lot of panic calls? We got a mysterious email. Should we call the Secret Service? What have you been seeing, and what would you like to see?
Yeah, unfortunately, Robyn, I think most people call us too late, right? I can't tell you the amount of times that I get calls as it relates to, hey, we were affecting a transfer of money, and we transferred $10 million overseas about 6 days ago. Well, unfortunately, listen, we'll do our best to go after that money, but at the end of the day, that's really too late. I look at a cyber incident in 3 phases: before, during, and after, right? So left of boom, boom, and right of boom, right? And when you really look at that, law enforcement needs to be in now, right at the beginning, at the before. So like today, right? We're sitting down, we're talking about what are the things that organizations can do to prepare before the incident. That will help. As you talked about, Robyn, it really is dependent on people, right? If you don't have a practice as it relates to phishing, even though it only takes one person, if you're going through the drills, it's a comprehensive list of things that you've done that may limit the impact if just one person clicks on that particular email. By engaging with law enforcement, it does a couple of things for you, right? You learn best practices on it. You have a number to call if something does occur, right? You know what law enforcement is going to do when it comes in. You may even be able to start talking about what's the information that law enforcement is going to need during an incident, right? There's a lot of myths out there that basically, years ago when these things first happened, law enforcement would come in and we'd image the entire network. We needed all of the particular information, and we'd go in and took a very, very broad brush to these cyber incidents. Now we're almost coming in and we're taking a scalpel, right, to something. We're being much more surgical as to what we need. We understand more of what the business needs are. We understand more of the privacy regulations and all of those concerns. And we really could talk through the limited information that law enforcement need right at the beginning. So take a ransomware attack, right? Listen, we know a lot of those things are occurring, one, by phishing emails. We want that phishing email. I will tell you, the approach the service takes to it is we want to follow the money. Generally speaking, a bad guy conducted that incident because they wanted to get paid, right? And so what's that virtual currency wallet that they provided, if that's what it is, since that's a majority of what they're providing? That will help me move very, very quickly to try and either identify the actors and hopefully get the money back.
So, Mike, that leads to my next question, which is a lot of times that money has left the country. And so I'd like to know, are there any coordinated efforts going on with law enforcement to really improve the ability for the countries to work together in these investigations? It seems like everything always dead ends as soon as it moves overseas, or all of a sudden it takes 4 years. to get my money back or figure out who did this.
Listen,
Are there any steps being taken in that area?
So listen, that is a huge challenge. I will tell you that we do deal a lot with our foreign counterparts on this. We deal very extensively. Law enforcement deals extensively with Europol. I will tell you that we have extensive contacts with some of the different banking institutions out there. Obviously, FinCEN, we work very closely with in order to recover money. Right? Some of it depends on how quickly that money is identified. You have the advantage of some of the corresponding accounts. I will tell you, the sooner that you call us, the better it is for us to get that money back. Think about how a bad guy is going to move, right? I will tell you that a lot of times right now, initially, a lot of the, especially as it relates to BECs, that hop was going very quickly internationally, right? Because they figured they can get the money. Well, I'll tell you, they now know that that's a tripwire, right? That's a flag, and banking institutions and financial institutions will flag that and slow that down. So now some of those hops are actually more domestic, giving us some time to go after that money. So it really is a cat and mouse game, Robyn. As each one of these things comes up, we have to evolve and adapt to this. There's lots of discussions, like I said, internationally on how to improve this. I think the biggest thing is to have that contact very quickly, to be able to have some internal processes to identify it very quickly and to prevent it, and to call law enforcement as quickly as possible, as well as your financial institution.
So that then leads to another question, which I think I hear this one more than anything, and it's actually even come up in the Q&A here today, which is ransomware. I pay the ransom, even though usually the FBI tells me not to. What kind of consequences am I likely to face if I pay the ransom? Because quite frankly, it is more important to me to be able to get my business running again. And I just have to get that done.
Yeah, it really is a challenging discussion. Law enforcement would say to you is, we don't want you to pay the ransom, okay? And that's for several reasons, right? First one is it encourages this kind of activity before. Bad guys know that, hey, listen, if you pay the ransom, they're going to continue with that activity, right? The second thing is you may or may not get your information back as it comes to ransomware, right? The hope is that if you pay the ransom, right, your networks are released, or the data that they have is sort of returned. Nothing says, though, especially now we sort of evolve with ransomware, where before they were just locking up networks. Now they're exfiltrating data, holding data for ransom, right? But you can never be sure that you get all of the data back, right, on that. And so your data, once it's out there, maybe out there, you're really paying them not to release it. And who knows if they'll come back to you. Then there's the challenges of who you're paying, right? As far as, and Robyn, you were a prosecutor, right? When you let money move overseas, is it going to another nation state? Is it going to a OFAC designated actor on there? I will tell you this, though. Law enforcement does understand, right, that your business has to keep running. And I think what you've seen with the latest guidance that OFAC put out on there was, the intention was, if you're going to pay the ransom, contact law enforcement ahead of time. Provide law enforcement with that information so that they can take action against those individuals. I'm not telling you that we will recognize every particular wallet that it's going to, and that in your case it will be successful. But I will tell you, what I will tell you is this: is that it's been my experience in 24, 25 years of law enforcement, that bad guys follow the path of least resistance. There's only so many wallets that they're going to use. The more information that you have, the better law enforcement is. I'll give you a stat that I read the other day, that 56% of organizations pay the ransom, right? Well, think of it this way. If at least all of those were providing law enforcement with all the artifacts of the crime, right, to include the wallet, to include the phishing emails, think about that piece of the puzzle that might help us put all of those things together to start taking off organizations, right? Right now, think of a crime as a puzzle, right? Without some of that information, without some of the pieces of the puzzle, I'll never put it together. So all of those things law enforcement needs to close the loop and start taking off some of these actors.
So wearing my hat as a prosecutor, that makes a ton of sense, because I know that one of the ways that you build cases is you make that mosaic, right? You put together all the little pieces, and it turns out this email address over here is going to lead me to this account over there. But when I think about it, from my private sector perspective, one that you'll be joining me in probably a couple of days here after the dust clouds settle, it gets a lot harder to see where the benefit is to my client to providing that information to the Secret Service when there's a risk that the Secret Service is going to turn around and say, you just funded terrorist activity, and now, we need to be investigating what you've done. So what do you want to say to my client about that, Mike? How do you convince them that it's still worth their while to try and keep that relationship going with you, even though the benefit is to you and the risk is to them?
So, Rob, I'm gonna turn it around a little bit. I think from your end of it as a prosecutor, right? If I, as a law enforcement agent, wanted to bring a case to you, charging some company, right, with a violation of paying OFAC, if they had contacted law enforcement ahead of time, and if their business was in jeopardy, and they provided that information to law enforcement ahead of time, right, and then went ahead and made the payment, right, as opposed to the company that did not notify law enforcement and made the payment ahead of time, where is that going to stand as far as mitigating factors as you're deciding to bring prosecution? Because I'll tell you, right, you may make a payment without notifying law enforcement. Nothing says that law enforcement is not going to find out about that payment for lots of reasons, right? Law enforcement sort of working in that space. I may be watching those payments go into certain wallets. Now I'm coming back and I'm questioning what's going on with that. And maybe I'm looking at it with a different eye. I think right now the way to look at it is we have to build some trust here, right? You're not going to know the benefit of moving money in virtual currencies is the anonymity of it, right? And so law enforcement understands when you get wallet XYZ, you may not know that XYZ is actually, and that money is actually going to a designated entity 3 wallets away from that as it goes through mixers and tumblers and all of the other places, right? But at least you called with the good intentions of saying, hey, listen, my business is going to go under. I have no choice but to make this payment, unless you can, tell me that you're going to get the actor, right? And so, listen, give me the wallet. We'll do the best that we can. You go and make the payment, and we see where that goes. Understand, right, that this is a very complex environment. We all have to do certain things. A lot of this can be handled ahead of time in the prepare phase, right? Again, with ransomware, if you're having backups, if you're doing a lot of those basic cyber hygiene models, you should be able to mitigate that particular damage as well, right? And so the first step is that if you do get hit, then understand that you have law enforcement, you've worked with law enforcement, and you have somebody to call, and you've talked through all of these things ahead of time.
So I think that actually segues nicely into another question. Everything that you're talking about, this brings us back to this human relationship space. What you're imagining is a world where I already have your phone number in my cell phone, and I know to call you because something has come up. But I do know that that is not a common experience, and that for a lot of people, something comes up and they're calling the FBI, they're talking to somebody, they're getting a desk number at the resident agent, maybe they're calling the task force, the cop that they're talking to, very busy, got 14 calls that day, is not responsive. What can people do to improve that communication? I'd like to hear your perspective from the other side. What can they do to help you hear them when they come to you with a problem?
Listen, we have realized that the outreach piece of what we now call our cyber fraud task forces is critical, right? And so in that preparation phase, if your organization is doing tabletop exercises, so Robyn, when you're dealing with your clients and you bring them through an incident response exercise, bring in law enforcement, right? Let them sit at the table at certain pieces of that, right? So that they can advise in that preparation phase, right? Listen, no plan survives first contact, but I can tell you this, just from my years of law enforcement experience and military experience, that if you've done the preparation, you could pivot under any circumstances once you've gone through those basic pieces and you've built the relationships. I'm going to tell you, if you want to recommend any kind of reading that understands the importance of relationships, General McChrystal has a couple of books, Team of Teams and Leaders, in which he really discusses the benefits of relationships during crises and breaking down cultures. I highly recommend it. I will tell you that the Secret Service now does a incident response seminar. We're doing 6 of these probably every year, some virtually, and then some hopefully we'll be getting back to in person. And the idea behind them is sit down in groups, right, and do a tabletop exercise. But to your point, Robyn, that you started the conversation with, right, people, right? People, processes, technology. When I go to that equation, people are the most important thing. The relationships are the most important thing. And if you have that established, we can work through just about anything.
So cybercrime and financial crimes in general are incredibly multinational at this point. And I'm wondering, if I'm not an American, what kind of resources are available to me for assistance from American law enforcement if something happens?
Yeah. So most right now, if your company is overseas, right, there is engagement with the Secret Service, the FBI, cyber ALATs that are out there. We work very closely with Europol. We work very closely with the Australian Federal Police. We work very closely with the Germans and the National Crime Agency in England, right? And so one of the things that I would say is Secret Service has 2 international cyber fraud task forces, Rome and London, right? Reach out to those embassies and engage with the U.S. law enforcement there, right? Meet with the U.S. law enforcement individuals so that you already have that engagement going forward.
And so when we get these large-scale attacks that involve multinational entities, large companies, another issue that can come up is that law enforcement will very often play their cards pretty close to the chest. It can take a very long time before word gets out, yes, this was a state actor. In the meanwhile, if I'm a company, I'm left holding the bag, trying to fight it out with my insurance company and possibly with federal regulators or regulators in whatever country I'm based in, while waiting for law enforcement to finally acknowledge what really happened here. Do you have any thoughts on any directions that the service might be moving in or other agencies to try and improve that kind of communication?
Yeah, it's a tough question, Robyn, and a challenging question in that a lot of times it's not as clear cut, right, as everyone thinks, especially, right, and I'm going to look at it from the service perspective, right? Everybody likes to think right away that it is a nation state actor, right, that's doing it, right? And listen, there's a lot of reasons for that, right? Hey, it's my network, I had it secure. Obviously, I can't defend against a nation state actor. I can tell you I've been involved in several nation state types of cases, primarily with terrorism and with counterfeiting of currency by North Korea, by Hezbollah's involvement in the movement of counterfeit currency. It's really hard to tie something specifically to the state, right? And you know this, Robyn, from a prosecutor. Just because I'm in a certain state doesn't make me necessarily a state actor, right? I mean, where's that intent from the state? Where is that communication that says this is a particular state actor, right? So a lot of the times you're making that analogy from basic tactics, techniques, and procedures, and you're saying, hey, these things are in that case. We don't get too involved with it as a nation state. We would defer to the FBI as to making a lot of those things, those designations, right? We might contribute if the 2 cases overlap where we have a criminal actor that's acting at the behest of a nation state. I know the Bureau is engaging increasingly more with the private sector to try and provide that information on it. And so I think we need to do better, but I think it's a real challenging question that needs a lot more work. Does that make sense, Robyn?
That does make sense. And I'm glad to hear that that's at least something that is recognized as needing some more work. And I could talk to you for a while, Mike, but I think we're running toward the end of our time together. So I want to ask you one basic blunt question that I get asked a lot coming out of my own experience in prosecuting these crimes. How often do you actually catch the bad guy?
Listen, unfortunately, we don't catch the bad guy quite enough as we would like. What I like to say is I think the Secret Service sort of punches above our weight as it comes to taking down some of the more notorious bad guys. But I will tell you that one of the things that we're trying to do is really raise the cost to these individuals. And that's two things, right? It's putting the bad guys away, but also making these things more costly for them to commit that particular activity. I think that's the only way we do it. And to be honest with you, Robyn, we need a lot of we all need to work more closely together as an integrated team, right? I'll leave it with this, Robyn. If you were mugged right on the street, would you call law enforcement?
Absolutely.
So if somebody picks your pockets with a cybercrime, if you call law enforcement and we work more closely together, I think we can put more of these bad guys away.
And I like that way of looking at it, Mike, which is, I think, something very easy to forget, which is that when companies have these things happen to them, they're victims of crimes. And you're right. If my wallet gets taken out of my pocket or somebody breaks into my car, I call the police, even if I know that they may not catch the person, but I want to be a part of the process of trying to make that kind of crime stop. And it's you can't stop the crime, but you can try and make them do something different, or try and make it hard for them to do what they do. One last question here for you, Mike, and this one's going to be a tough one. Now that you're out of the Secret Service, what is the one thing that you can tell us now that you wouldn't have been able to say last week?
Listen, I'm not sure right now that technically I'm still not out. I'm still on the books through the end of May. And so I'll keep some of those things to myself for now, but thank you.
Well, next year, Mike. Robyn, thank you so much. Mike, great job as always, and congrats again on a fantastic career, and best of luck going forward.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Appreciate it.
Great job. And our next panel is coming up in just a few minutes at 1:20 on ransomware. So we'll dive completely in to the ransomware topic. Yeah, thank you.